Go ahead, ma'am, I said, capping the nozzle slowly. Tell them I'm stealing gas. The smell of gasoline hung thick in the July heat, sharp and metallic, clinging to the back of my throat as I stood beside my old Ford F-150 with the tailgate down and a 5-gallon red fuel can resting against the bumper. The sun was just coming up over Willow Creek Estates, turning every manicured lawn into a sheet of gold, sprinklers ticking in perfect rhythm like some suburban metronome. And there she was, Melissa Whitmore, white linen blouse crisp, phone pressed to her ear, pointing at me like she'd just uncovered a felony. Yes, 911, she said loudly enough for the entire cul-de-sac to hear. There's a man siphoning gas from the community emergency tank. He's aggressive and refusing to stop. Aggressive. I looked down at the steady stream of fuel flowing from my own can into my truck and almost smiled. The air felt electric, not because of danger, but because of the performance. Melissa ruled this neighborhood like a self-appointed mayor, 6 straight years as HOA president, the kind of woman who measured grass height with a ruler and fined people for leaving trash bins out 12 minutes past pickup. She'd convinced half the residents to chip in $2,000 each for what she called the Community Fuel Stability Program, after gas prices spiked last year. Installed a shared storage tank near the clubhouse. Made a big speech about preparedness and unity. I declined. Politely. I prefer receipts to promises. That apparently made me suspicious. I'd moved into this neighborhood quietly 6 months ago. No announcement. No title on the mailbox. Just Daniel Harper, homeowner, drives an aging pickup, keeps to himself. I let them think I worked some ordinary 9 to 5. I let Melissa assume she outranked me. This morning, when she saw me pouring gas from a can I bought and paid for at a station 3 miles down Route 17, she didn't ask a question. She didn't check a fact. She dialed 911 like it was a weapon. I could hear the faint crackle from her phone as dispatch responded. Somewhere in the distance, a siren chirped to life. Neighbors began stepping onto their porches, coffee mugs frozen halfway to their lips, drawn by the promise of drama. The scent of fresh-cut grass mixed with gasoline fumes and expensive perfume as Melissa walked closer, chin high, voice syrupy but sharp. You can't just take from the community, she said, loud enough for witnesses. I tightened the cap on my fuel can and set it upright. My hands were steady. My truck wasn't connected to her precious tank. Never had been. I glanced at the small security camera mounted above my garage door, its red light blinking patiently. I like keeping records. The sirens grew louder, bouncing off stucco walls and polished SUVs. Melissa's smile widened just a fraction, like she'd already won. She had no idea the call she just made was about to take a very different route. And she definitely didn't know who she was accusing in her own driveway. The first patrol car rolled into the cul-de-sac with its lights flashing, but no siren now, just that quiet authority that makes people step back without being told. The second cruiser parked behind it, tires crunching over the perfectly edged gravel Melissa had once insisted be replaced with decorative stone. Officer Reed stepped out first, young, squared shoulders, hand resting near his radio as he scanned the scene. Behind him was Officer Alvarez, steady and observant, the kind who notices everything and says very little. The morning air still carried the scent of gasoline and freshly watered lawns as they approached us. Melissa wasted no time. She stepped forward, gesturing dramatically toward my truck. He is siphoning fuel from the community emergency reserve, she said, voice sharp and rehearsed. We paid for that tank with HOA funds. He refused to show documentation. Documentation. I almost admired the word choice. Reed looked from her to me, then to the red fuel can sitting upright on my tailgate. Sir, can you explain what is going on? He asked evenly. I nodded and spoke calmly. I purchased 5 gallons at Miller's Station off Route 17 this morning. Receipt is in the glove compartment. I am refueling my own vehicle. My voice stayed level, the way it always does. I have learned that calm makes people louder. Melissa folded her arms, the gold bracelet on her wrist catching the sunlight. That tank is for community use only, she insisted. And he opted out of the program. He has no right to draw from it. I followed her gaze. The actual community tank sat 50 yards away near the clubhouse, locked behind a chain link enclosure with a keypad. My truck was nowhere near it. Reed glanced at Alvarez, then back at the scene. He walked a slow circle around my truck, eyes tracing the fuel line, the closed cap, the independent container. The faint crackle of his shoulder radio filled the silence. Neighbors lingered on sidewalks pretending to check mail, whispering behind coffee mugs. I could feel their eyes measuring me the way Melissa always had. New guy, old truck, does not attend meetings, does not clap during her speeches. Ma'am, Alvarez said gently. Do you see any connection between this vehicle and the community tank? Melissa hesitated for half a second. Just half. Then she doubled down. He must have filled that can from it earlier. He was out here before sunrise. The accusation hung in the humid air. Reed looked at me again. Recognition flickered behind his eyes, subtle but unmistakable. He straightened slightly. Sir, do you have identification? He asked, careful, almost formal now. I wiped my hands on a shop towel and reached into my back pocket slowly, deliberately. The neighborhood held its breath. The sprinklers clicked off in sequence, leaving a sudden stillness that felt almost staged. I handed him my wallet. He opened it. The badge caught the morning light before his expression changed completely. Officer Reed's posture shifted so subtly most people would have missed it, but I did not. His shoulders squared, his tone changed, and the morning sun reflected clean off the metal badge inside my wallet. He looked up at me, then back at the identification, then at me again. Chief Harper, he said carefully, the words landing heavier than the sirens had a minute earlier. The cul-de-sac went quiet in a way that felt physical, like someone had turned the volume knob on the entire neighborhood down to zero. Melissa's smile froze mid-expression. For a split second, she looked confused, like she had misheard him. Chief, she repeated, the word thinner now. Officer Alvarez stepped closer, recognition settling in. Sir, he said with a slight nod, respectful but professional. I closed my wallet and slid it back into my pocket. The smell of gasoline still lingered in the heat, mixing with the faint scent of Melissa's perfume and the chlorine drifting from someone's backyard pool. I kept my voice even. Officers, I purchased 5 gallons at Miller's Station. At 6:23 this morning. I can provide the receipt and security footage from my garage camera. My vehicle has not been anywhere near the community storage tank. Reed cleared his throat and turned toward Melissa. Ma'am, we are not seeing any evidence of a crime at this time. The words were polite. Final. Melissa blinked rapidly, recalculating. Well, that is not the point, she said, forcing her voice back to full volume as a few neighbors edged closer to listen. He declined participation in the community fuel program. He has been undermining HOA authority for months. There it was. Not about gas. About control. I could feel eyes on my back, neighbors who had quietly written checks for that tank, neighbors who had attended Melissa's emergency meetings about preparedness and unity. I folded my arms loosely, mirroring her stance without the tension. Melissa, I said calmly, using her first name for the first time, declining an optional HOA program is not a criminal offense. Her jaw tightened. The gold bracelet on her wrist stopped moving. Reed glanced toward the clubhouse, then back at her. Ma'am, calling 911 requires a reasonable belief that a crime is occurring. Misuse of emergency services can be taken seriously. The weight of that sentence settled over the street. No threats, just facts. The sprinklers had stopped completely now. The only sound was a distant lawn mower and the faint hum of a patrol car engine idling. Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked toward the neighbors for support, but no one spoke. Authority is a strange thing. When it is real, it does not need to shout. I reached into my truck and retrieved the folded receipt, holding it out without drama. Reed glanced at the timestamp and nodded. 6:23 a.m., 5 gallons, paid in full. He handed it back. Everything appears lawful. Melissa's composure began to crack at the edges, not loudly, just enough to see it. And in that quiet space between accusation and reality, the balance of power shifted completely. Melissa recovered faster than I expected. Embarrassment flashed across her face, but it hardened into something else almost immediately, something defensive and calculating. She smoothed her blouse, lifted her chin, and shifted the narrative like a seasoned politician. This is not about criminal charges, she said, voice regaining that practiced sweetness. This is about community compliance. We have rules. The word rules hung in the air like it carried more weight than state law. I could hear a screen door creak open behind me as another neighbor stepped out, drawn by the tension. Reed and Alvarez remained still, professional, waiting for direction that was no longer theirs to give. I kept my tone measured. Melissa, you called emergency services and reported theft. That is a specific claim. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Because you have been hostile to the program since day one, she shot back. You refuse to contribute. You refuse to attend meetings. You refuse to support the initiative. I almost laughed at the phrasing. Refuse to support the initiative. As if opting out of a voluntary fund was treason. The morning heat intensified, baking the asphalt, carrying the faint scent of rubber and cut grass. My truck ticked softly as the engine cooled. I looked past her toward the clubhouse, toward the fenced enclosure with the keypad and the tank that had cost this neighborhood nearly $100,000 after installation fees and maintenance contracts were factored in. I had read every line of that proposal before declining. I read contracts the way other people read headlines. Slowly. Twice. Officers, I said calmly. For clarity, the community tank remains locked, correct? Reed nodded. Yes, sir. It appears secured. And there is no visible tampering? Alvarez added. No, sir. The facts were stacking quietly, brick by brick. Melissa sensed it. That tank exists for emergencies, she insisted. And if residents see someone hoarding fuel independently, it creates distrust. Hoarding. Another dramatic word. I glanced at the red 5-gallon can resting on my tailgate. 5 gallons. Enough for a lawn mower and a short commute. Hardly an underground operation. Ma'am, Reed said gently but firmly. Personal fuel purchases are not prohibited under municipal code. Municipal code, not HOA guidelines. There is a difference. Melissa's jaw tightened again. The gold bracelet caught the light as her hand curled into a fist at her side. Not violent, just controlled frustration. Around us, neighbors began whispering in tones that were no longer supportive. I could hear fragments. Optional program. $2,000. Security cameras. The narrative was shifting in real time. I met Melissa's eyes and kept my voice steady, low, impossible to misinterpret. You escalated this to law enforcement over a voluntary disagreement. The words were not an accusation. They were a mirror. For the first time since the patrol cars arrived, she looked uncertain. Authority borrowed from a homeowners association is one thing. Authority recognized by the badge in my wallet is another. And the neighborhood was beginning to see the difference. Melissa's composure did not break all at once. It thinned, like ice under weight. She drew a slow breath and pivoted again, voice cool, strategic. Fine, she said. Perhaps law enforcement is not necessary. But as HOA President, I am issuing a formal compliance review regarding your repeated non-participation in community initiatives. There it was again. Initiatives. I could almost hear the capital letter. The patrol car engines idled softly behind us, a low mechanical hum that felt steadier than the conversation. The morning sun was higher now, reflecting off windshields and polished SUVs, catching every detail. I rested one hand lightly on the side of my truck. Melissa, I said calmly, voluntary programs are not enforceable under our bylaws unless a supermajority vote amended the covenants. Her eyes flickered, just briefly. That flicker told me she knew exactly what I was referencing. I had requested copies of the bylaws when I moved in. I had read the amendment procedures. 67% approval required. Recorded with the county clerk. Filed and notarized. Paper leaves a trail. Silence spread across the cul-de-sac again. A few neighbors shifted their weight, glancing between us. Reed looked at Alvarez, unsure if they were still needed. I gave them a small nod. Officers, thank you for responding, I said. There is no criminal matter here. Reed inclined his head. Understood, sir. Melissa's voice sharpened. This community invested nearly $100,000 in that tank. We cannot have residents undermining collective safety. I turned toward the clubhouse slowly, letting the visual speak before the words did. And that tank, I said evenly, was purchased under a discretionary reserve category that required transparent accounting. Her jaw tightened again. The gold bracelet stopped moving. I continued, not louder, just clearer. Under state law, reserve funds must be itemized and accessible to all contributing homeowners upon request. I could see it now. Not anger. Calculation. She had expected resistance from a neighbor. She had not expected statutory language. A breeze carried the faint smell of warm asphalt and distant gasoline from my capped can. You are implying something, she said carefully. I am stating that transparency protects everyone, I replied. Around us, whispers grew louder. One neighbor stepped forward. We never saw a full cost breakdown, he said quietly. Another nodded. The maintenance contract was rushed. Melissa's control over the crowd was slipping, not dramatically, but steadily. Authority built on intimidation weakens under scrutiny. I watched her shoulders rise and fall with a tight breath. She looked toward the patrol cars as if they might restore the hierarchy she preferred. But the officers remained neutral, professional, outside the HOA's internal structure. The difference between municipal jurisdiction and neighborhood governance was becoming very clear to everyone watching. I folded my arms loosely, not aggressive, just settled. If there are concerns about misuse of emergency services, I added calmly, or about financial reporting, those are matters that can be addressed properly. The word properly carried weight. Not loud, not threatening, just inevitable. And for the first time since she dialed 911, Melissa looked like she understood that the conversation had moved beyond gasoline entirely. The shift happened quietly, almost invisibly, but it was there. Melissa straightened her shoulders and forced a tight smile, the kind meant to signal that she was still in control. This conversation is inappropriate for a public street, she said crisply. Any financial records can be reviewed at the next scheduled board meeting. Scheduled, controlled, contained. I could hear the strategy in her tone. Move the discussion behind closed doors where agendas are set in advance and microphones can be muted. The patrol cars remained idling at the curb, sunlight flashing across the windshields in steady pulses. A breeze lifted the edge of a printed HOA notice taped to the clubhouse door down the block, the paper fluttering like it wanted to join the conversation. I nodded slowly. Of course, I said. Board meetings are appropriate, as long as records are complete. The word complete landed deliberately. Melissa's eyes narrowed just slightly. All expenditures were approved, she replied. By the board. A neighbor behind her spoke up, hesitant, but audible. We never voted on the storage maintenance extension. Another voice followed. Or the private security contract. The air shifted again. Not dramatic. Just real. I watched Melissa calculate the growing risk of open dialogue. Authority thrives on silence. Transparency feeds on questions. Officer Reed glanced toward me. Sir, are we cleared? To return to patrol? He asked professionally. Yes, I answered evenly. There is no criminal issue at this time. The patrol cars pulled away slowly, tires rolling over smooth pavement, leaving behind the quiet aftermath of a public miscalculation. The absence of flashing lights felt louder than the sirens had. Melissa looked around at the small gathering of residents, now openly listening instead of whispering. Her voice lowered, losing its performance edge. We acted in good faith, she said, more to the group than to me. I tilted my head slightly. Good faith is documented, I replied. It leaves receipts. The faint scent of gasoline still lingered near my truck, but it was no longer the center of attention. The red can sat capped and upright, forgotten. This was about something else now. I stepped back toward my driveway, giving space without surrendering ground. If any homeowner would like assistance requesting financial records under state association law, the process is straightforward, I said calmly. Written request. 10 business days for response. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Melissa's jaw tightened again, but this time it was quieter, more internal. She understood that the terrain had changed. Not because of volume. Not because of intimidation. Because of process. Around us, neighbors began exchanging looks that carried new awareness. The tank near the clubhouse no longer represented preparedness. It represented paperwork, oversight, questions. And for the first time since she dialed 911, Melissa was no longer directing the narrative. She was reacting to it. The difference between control and accountability had become visible in broad daylight, under the steady sun of a very ordinary Tuesday morning. By late afternoon, the neighborhood felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just aware. I spent the next few hours exactly the way I always do when something does not sit right. I documented. I pulled the public records for Willow Creek Estates through the county clerk's website. Articles of incorporation, reserve fund disclosures, amendment filings. The digital copies loaded slowly, page by page, sunlight from my kitchen window stretching across the table as the air conditioning hummed steadily overhead. The community fuel tank proposal was there, dated 8 months earlier. Initial budget listed at $78,000. Installation fees. Inspection fees. Administrative processing costs. That last line caught my attention. Administrative costs had ballooned the final figure to just over $99,000. I compared it to the quarterly financial summary Melissa emailed to residents last winter. The numbers did not align cleanly. Not wildly off. Just enough to notice if you were trained to notice. A 2% discrepancy here. A rounded figure there. The kind of detail most people scroll past. I printed everything. Paper makes things real. By early evening, the sky over the subdivision had shifted from bright blue to a soft amber glow. Porch lights flicked on one by one. My phone buzzed quietly. A message from Tom Reynolds down the street. If we request records, will it stay confidential? I read it twice before replying. State law protects formal requests. 10 minutes later, another message arrived. Then another. The morning spectacle had done something Melissa had not anticipated. It had made people curious. And curiosity leads to questions. I drafted a simple template letter citing the statute for financial transparency under homeowners association governance. Clear language. No emotion. Just procedure. I sent it to 3 neighbors who had reached out. By sunset, 5 separate written requests were prepared. 5 households asking for full accounting of reserve expenditures, maintenance contracts, and vendor agreements related to the fuel storage project. The smell of grilled burgers drifted faintly from somewhere across the block. Ordinary life continuing as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Around 7:30, my security camera notification chimed softly. Melissa stood near the clubhouse, speaking intensely with 2 board members beneath the overhead lights. Her gestures were sharper now. Defensive. I watched without sound, just observing body language the way I have for years. Authority under pressure moves differently. Later that night, an official email arrived from the HOA account. Special board review scheduled. Emergency tone. Controlled phrasing. Attempt to regain narrative. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of crickets through the open window. This was no longer about 5 gallons of gasoline. It was about documentation, accountability, and a morning phone call that should never have been made. Melissa had tried to use emergency services as leverage. Instead, she had triggered scrutiny. And scrutiny, once it starts, does not disappear just because someone sends an email. The special board review was scheduled for Thursday night at 7 o'clock sharp, and by 6:30 the clubhouse parking lot was fuller than I had ever seen it. Pickup trucks, family sedans, even a few luxury sport utility vehicles lined the curb under the yellow glow of overhead lights. The air carried the faint scent of fresh mulch and warm concrete as residents filed inside, murmuring in low tones that did not sound like casual conversation. I took a seat near the back wall, not at the center table, not in uniform, just another homeowner holding a thin folder of printed records. Melissa stood at the front beside the long folding table where the board usually sat elevated, her posture rigid, smile practiced but thinner than usual. A stack of documents rested in front of her, perfectly aligned, as if neatness could substitute for clarity. "We appreciate everyone's passion," she began, voice amplified slightly by the small speaker system. "But let us remember that this board has always acted in the best interest of community safety." Safety. The word landed softly, but the room did not soften with it. Tom Reynolds raised his hand first. "We submitted written requests under state transparency requirements," he said calmly. "We are asking for full itemized invoices and vendor agreements for the fuel tank project." 5 other homeowners nodded in quiet agreement. Melissa glanced down at her prepared papers. "Summaries were already distributed," she replied. I opened my folder and placed the county-filed incorporation documents on my lap, the paper making a crisp sound in the otherwise still room. "Summaries are not itemized ledgers," I said evenly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room was quiet enough to hear the air conditioning kick on. One of the other board members shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another flipped through a binder too quickly. The discrepancy we had noticed was no longer theoretical. It was printed. Administrative processing fees increased by nearly 20% after approval, a neighbor stated, reading directly from a document. "Can we see the contract authorizing that change?" Melissa's composure flickered again, subtle but visible. Adjustments were necessary due to unforeseen supply chain issues, she answered. The explanation sounded rehearsed. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on my knees. Under association law, material cost adjustments require board vote and recorded amendment if they exceed approved allocation, I said calmly. Was that vote documented? Silence answered first. Not dramatic. Just heavy. Papers rustled. Someone cleared a throat. The gold bracelet on Melissa's wrist tapped lightly against the table as her hand tightened. We acted in good faith, she repeated, softer now. But the phrase no longer carried authority. It sounded defensive. A resident near the front raised his phone. If records are incomplete, he said carefully, we can request an independent audit. The word audit changed the temperature in the room more than any accusation had. Melissa's shoulders stiffened. For the first time since the morning she dialed emergency services, she was not directing the conversation at all. She was responding to it. The tank outside no longer symbolized preparedness. It symbolized paperwork that did not line up. And as the meeting stretched past 8:30, it became clear to everyone present that the real issue had never been gasoline. It had been accountability. The vote for an independent audit happened just before 9:15 that night, and it was not close. Hands went up across the room, hesitant at first, then steady. Even one of the board members lifted his hand after a long pause, eyes fixed on the table instead of on Melissa. The motion passed with a clear majority. No shouting, no dramatic exits, just procedure. Melissa sat very still as the decision settled over her, the overhead lights reflecting off the polished surface of the table in front of her. The gold bracelet on her wrist no longer tapped. It rested. The room did not feel triumphant. It felt resolved. Residents began gathering their folders and phones. Conversations quieter now, but no longer uncertain. Outside, the night air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and distant rain. I stepped into the parking lot under the soft glow of the streetlights, listening to the low murmur of neighbors who, for the first time in months, were speaking openly about where their dues were going. Within 2 weeks, the independent auditor's preliminary report confirmed what the paperwork had suggested. Vendor invoices had been rerouted through a consulting company owned by a relative of one of the board officers. Administrative fees had been inflated beyond the approved budget. Nothing dramatic enough for headlines, but enough to require formal correction. Melissa resigned 3 days after the report was circulated to all homeowners. Her email was brief. Personal reasons. The tank near the clubhouse remained in place, locked and functional, but it no longer represented unchecked authority. It represented oversight. A new interim board was elected within the month. Financial summaries were posted publicly. Line items were cleared down to the dollar. The community fuel program was restructured as strictly optional with written disclosure attached to every participation form. As for the morning that started all of this, the 911 call was formally documented as unfounded. No charges were filed. There did not need to be. The record itself was enough. On a quiet Saturday a few weeks later, I stood in my driveway again with the same red 5-gallon can resting against the tailgate. The sun was high, cicadas buzzing in the trees, ordinary suburban life moving at its steady pace. No patrol cars. No pointing fingers. Just the clean click of a gas cap sealing shut. A neighbor walking his dog gave me a nod that carried respect instead of suspicion. Authority does not need to announce itself. It does not need to measure grass or threaten fines. It shows up when called, it answers questions, and it leaves a paper trail. Melissa had tried to use a phone call as leverage. What she triggered instead was transparency. And transparency, once invited into the room, does not quietly disappear. It signs its name at the bottom of the page and lets the ink dry in plain sight.